Chapter 24. Additional Notes on Style, Problems, and Solutions. Like Chapter 23, this chapter has many exercises that you ought to try to make sure that you understand the material. The chapter is basically a list of do's and don'ts of paper writing. Some problems that you need to look out for are the following. Trite expressions. These are the phrases, also known as cliches, that have become so overused that they have lost their impact. Examples of trite phrases are listed in your book on pages 569 and 570. Some of these are stubborn as a mule, peer pressure, easy as pie, generation gap, and others. They show laziness on the writer's part to find a good explanation, and also a lack of imagination. Writers should also at all costs avoid euphemisms. Euphemisms are words or phrases that have been substituted in our vocabulary to seem more polite. In social situations, we like to use these words to smooth over something negative. In general, though, when we use euphemisms, we sound old-fashioned, pretentious, and stiff. Instead of saying low-income individual, we would do better in our papers to just say poor person. Likewise, we would not want to write that Thomas Jefferson passed on in 1826. Instead, we say that he died that year. Check out the list on page 571 for more cliché terms. Sometimes repetition in a paper is a good thing, particularly if you can use it to prove a point. If my thesis was that my day was boring and followed the same pattern as every other day, I might choose to repeat myself for impact. Readers would get the idea about my boring day better if I said, "Today was boring, just as every other day has been. My alarm clock went off, I got up. I took a shower, I brushed my teeth. I got dressed, I went downstairs to eat breakfast," and so on. Do you see how my readers would get lulled to sleep out of boredom? I could also choose to repeat for clarity, which is what someone would do in a speech. Usually this is done by repeating a single word, and it is in a transition. Your book gives good explanations on this. There are, however, more times to avoid repetition than to use it. Avoid the words very, really, a lot, and others like them. Also, avoid using the same beginnings to sentences. We already discussed wordiness in the last chapter, which covered this point. Repeating sounds is also something that you should avoid, such as alliteration and consonants. Slang is something else that really ought to be left out of your paper, or at least selectively used. While you really can use it, if it's an effective way of demonstrating a point, it's usually not appropriate for the formal of papers. Some writers try to show off a more vocabulary that is elevated and more elaborate than they truly have. They may look up words in a thesaurus and plug them in, or they may just use the words that have more letters in them. While it's wonderful to have a wide selection of words in your vocabulary, you should make sure that you're paying attention to your audience and catering to their comprehension level. Only use elevated speech in cases whose terms fit better than any other. When you do, make sure that you choose words based on both their denotation and their connotation. Randomly placing 50-cent words throughout your paper will not get you a better grade, and it can actually lower your grade if you're not careful. Once again, I point you to your book examples on pages 575 and 576. Make sure that you also avoid sexist language. Your book defines sexist language as language that displays prejudice and stereotyped thinking about the roles, character, and worth of both sexes. Pages 577 and 578 list many good examples for the categories of occupations, character, social behavior, and language. Finally, we come to a slide of things to avoid at all costs. Some of these may be new to you, but remember that high school writing is not the same level as college writing. Using any of these techniques will deduct points from your grade. First of all, don't write a personal letter to your instructor or to any of your readers. It just takes up space and it reads like an excuse. You do not need to start off by saying, "We were given the assignment to create a paper on our favorite summer vacation. I could not decide on just one, so I've included 3 of them. I hope you'll enjoy. Please do not count off points." No reader needs to see that anywhere in the paper. The second rule here is don't make formal announcements of what you're going to do. While it's perfectly acceptable and even desirable to do so in speeches, explicitly telling your readers in writing what to expect is inappropriate. Do not say, "In this paper I will," or "You will find." The third thing to avoid is using a speech-making tone. Again, this is great to do in oral presentations because you need to give your listeners reference points, but you do not need to do it in formal papers. It's irritating to read and does not add anything of value to what you're saying. Your book uses the term shilly-shally and tells us not to use it. Basically, you want to avoid telling us that you think something. We already know that that's what you believe because that's your thesis. If you do shilly-shally, you come across as not being confident, and that makes readers nervous to believe you. Avoid what is called blustering. If you write that all red-blooded Americans know that the war in Iraq is wrong, you have just called into question the citizenship of anyone who disagrees with you, and have now put them on the defense. This next one listed is hard and catches almost 100% of my students. As a rule, avoid first and second person pronouns in formal papers. Do not use the words I, me, my, mine, you, yours, your, our, us, and we in papers. Use indefinite pronouns like anyone, someone, or words like the people instead. Finally, make sure that you define all jargon and unfamiliar words. Verify your audience and keep the words in line with ones that they would use. For this course, remember that your audience is comprised of your fellow class members.